Hello and welcome to Epicenter. No ambiguity, no noise. Let's come straight to the point. In this show, we talk about issues that make it to news headlines, and mostly about issues that ought to make it to news headlines, but don't. Today, I thought it might be a good idea to go back to the basics. What does news mean in 2023? Who's qualified to give us news? Is news ever objective? How do we differentiate between news and hysteria? Before any of you proceed to tell me that Purane Zamane mein or in good old days news was perfect, I must remind you that even that is nostalgia. Journalism has never been perfect. Spin and bias have always tainted the news. And even though it is logical for us to think that after decades of trial and error, we may have now arrived at what is fair and accurate reporting, but that isn't the case. Public confidence in news media continues to slip. And this is not just the crisis in India, it's crisis all over the world. I recently looked at a poll by USA Today, CNN Gallup, and it said only 36% of Americans believe news organizations get the facts straight, compared to 54% in mid-1989. News programs are growing ever more sensational, blurring the line between reporting and opinion. Networks pursue ratings at the expense of accuracy. Distortions and falsehoods undermine breaking news. The market incentivizes this kind of punditry. The news is gradually shifting from what we think is objective news and offers more opinion-based content that appeals to emotion. To talk about this crisis of news media, or to even believe, is there a crisis at all, or are we just jumping the gun, or is this just another disruption? We have on our show Mr. Shashi Shekhar Vempati, a technocrat, columnist, and policy thinker. Shashi has served in various leadership roles in the Indian technology, media, and public policy space. Most recently, Shashi has been appointed chairperson of External Experts Group to review the functioning and future roadmap of educational media research centers by University Grants Commission of India. Earlier, as the youngest and first non-bureaucrat CEO of Prasar Bharati, India's public broadcaster between 2017 and 2022, Shashi oversaw the transformation of broadcasting, both TV and radio, across the twin networks of Doordarshan and All India Radio. Between August 2017 and May 2019, Shashi also held the additional responsibility as CEO of India's parliamentary TV channel, Rajya Sabha TV, which covered the upper house of the Indian Parliament. Shashi is an alumnus of IIT Bombay. An author and columnist, Shashi has published on emerging technologies and public policy issues in the Indian context, covering digital platforms, media, AI, 5G, direct-to-mobile broadcasting, and Web 3.0, amongst others. Welcome to the show, Shashi.
Thank you. Very happy to be here and excited with this format. So look forward to a good conversation.
Thank you. I have known you for a long time, but I am not going to tell my audience how long we've known, because I've already dated myself by talking about the time when there was no private news and everything. So, but yes, I would like to let the audience know that I have been reading Shashi for more than a decade now. And it's been a wonderful journey to see you here. Shashi, you spent 5 years with public broadcaster Prasar Bharati. I'm just curious to know, and I want to ask you, because we do have most of our audience is millennials and Gen Z, and they don't really come from our era of when we used to watch primarily only Doordarshan, and private media came much later. Were there, and even we had forgotten a lot of things about Doordarshan. We have forgotten a lot of things about Doordarshan. When you joined Prasar Bharati, were there any things that sort of surprised you, pleasantly surprised you when you reached there?
So before I joined Prasar Bharati, I was already on the board of Prasar Bharati for a year. So I
Yeah.
already had some sense of, what was going on there. Pleasant surprises, the archives, because as you rightly pointed out, all of us grew up with Doordarshan, All India Radio. We all have fond memories
Yeah.
of DD and AAR. What was interesting to me is that much of the archives were preserved. We
Wow.
got them digitized. We started putting them on YouTube, and then I realized, I could actually recall various things like the opening ceremony of the Asian Games in 1983. Gavaskar scoring that pivotal century when he could, broke the records.
Yeah.
So many Rakesh Sharma's, interview when he was in space. So all kinds of videos that we remember watching on television back then on a black and white television with a rooftop antenna. So much of that archive is very much intact, and so that was a pleasant surprise.
And
And
in
it
good
got back
condition,
to me.
and they were analogs, but in good condition that you could digitize them.
Yes, yes, yes.
Wow.
Well, of course, not everything has been preserved. Some
Mm,
of it is lost, unfortunately. But a large part and fairly significant moments.
mm,
In fact, there are footages that we've not even seen because television, as you recall, in India was rooftop antennas and limited to a few cities.
yeah.
But there are footages from the 70s, which we none of us watched on television,
Yeah.
which are also available and preserved. There are much older, even older video footages. For example, television interviews by Jawaharlal Nehru,
Yeah.
which perhaps nobody in India had ever watched.
Yeah.
For the first time, we digitized and put them out there. So that was very interesting find.
Yeah.
And to me personally, the most interesting was the radio autobiographies because these are extensive conversations running into several hours, and they were recorded during the lifetime of the various individuals, and they were never made public. So they were
Yeah.
just sitting there in the vaults all these years. So you have J.R.D. Tata talking about his life experience. You have Minu Masani. So all kinds of icons
Wow.
in their voices. So
So that was interesting. For the longest time, my earliest memory is I don't think we had television when I was very young, but I do remember the television came a little later, but I do remember waking up to All India Radio, Vande Mataram. And I think that's the finest composition of Vande Mataram ever. And I remember waking up to that in the morning because that would play. That is how they started their broadcast in the morning. So that's my happy zone. And I often go to YouTube and it's there and I listen to it often. And I always say, I've said it so many times, I said, this is the finest composition of Vande Mataram ever because they used to sing that and that's how they used to start. And but yes, those are happy memories. But what I meant was a lot of people don't understand the reach because all people who live in cities and who mostly are using cable television and now of course smartphones, they don't understand the reach of AIR and Doordarshan even today because we forget that when we live in our little apartment complexes we forget there's a huge world out there too. So talk a little bit about the reach even today because I was pleasantly surprised that two things that surprised me about this was that DD News and AIR News are still the most trusted news brands in India even today. And DD India English News is the number one news broadcast today in India. Most people don't know this.
right,
So
right.
talk a little bit about.
Absolutely, yeah. And the reach, of course, of both Doordarshan and All India Radio is very vast and wide. There are two reasons for that. India, as you know, is a very diverse country, both geographically and socio-economically. So there are several regions which are not adequately covered by the private media because the private media tends to focus on the commercially viable markets, right,
Right.
and the big cities, and the big languages. But nobody is bothered about the hundreds of dialects of the Northeast, for example, or the tribal areas like of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh. And that is where you have All India Radio, for example, broadcasting in more than 100 languages and dialects. No private media in India does this, right? And hence they're able to reach every corner of India. For example, Man Ki Baat is translated in almost 40 different versions, right, of languages and dialects. So that is the strength of All India Radio. Similarly, Doordarshan. Doordarshan's strength stems from two areas. One is, of course, the different channels which are specific to every state. The second is what is called DD Free-Dish, which is a free-to-air DTH platform. It is a one of a kind in India, and it's perhaps you won't see it anywhere else in the world, where you have the public broadcaster operating a free-to-air DTH platform. And the beauty of this platform is that you don't have to pay a monthly fee. You just have to buy a set-top box on the open market, and you can get hundreds of channels. And then the satellite footprint covers almost every part of India, barring the islands of Andaman. But otherwise, the signal of the satellite is the entire landmass. It also covers some of the neighboring countries. So that's a big strength for Doordarshan.
Yeah, huge. Let's go back a little bit. Do you, very objectively speaking, do you think countries or sovereign nations, they, in today's day, when in 2023, when news doesn't really break itself, newsmakers are breaking news themselves. For example, if the Prime Minister is going somewhere, suppose he's going to visiting Ladakh, for example, he tells us himself on his Twitter feed. We don't need to know it nobody needs to break the news for us, or mostly other things also. Newsmakers are breaking news themselves. In this day and age, does state really need a public broadcaster?
Yeah. So the public broadcaster's purpose is quite different from the way we generally perceive news media, right? For example, there are large areas which are underserved by many services, like for example education, right? And we saw this during the COVID lockdown, that when schools were shut, and many sections of the society did not have the luxury of online classes. They don't have broadband at home. They don't have multiple computers or smartphones at home. To them, the educational channels that are part of the Doordarshan network through the Free-Dish platform were a huge godsend. Similarly, there is programming which is not commercially viable. It is not so to speak sexy or very entertaining, but this is important content, right? Content related to, for example, women's issues, health issues, especially public health. I mean, the sheer amount of content that was delivered during COVID-19 around public health, which no private broadcaster will do. Even, I mean, it's only now, for example, the government has come up with certain guidelines that require the private channels to dedicate about 30 minutes for public content, right? And that itself, there was such a hue and cry that you're forcing us, you're doing this, you're doing that. So the private channels have very clear commercial motives and commercial objectives, and there is a whole range of issues that don't fit within that framework, from education to health to all kinds of social content. And that is where the public broadcaster becomes very important. Similarly, when there is a crisis, we saw that during the, when you will be very intimately familiar with this, when Article 370 was scrapped, and the entire state of J&K was in a state of anxiety. There was no internet access. It was the public broadcaster which was consistently delivering the news, making sure there are no rumors, and keeping everyone informed. So crisis is another reason why the public broadcaster is important. And then, of course, there is propaganda from across the borders, which needs to be countered as well. So all of these are reasons why the public broadcaster is important and will continue to be important.
Yeah. See, I used to think, in my ignorance, I completely concede that before COVID, and this is pre-COVID, I used to think that Doordarshan AIR will go MTNL way. Because if you remember, we used to have MTNL phones, government phones. This is still cell phones arrived, and then they but for a longest time people used to keep MTNL, and then there were areas where private telecom companies were not reaching. But now if you see, the reach of private telecom has also increased so much, even in rural areas and in far-flung areas, that MTNL sort of is not as important of a thing. I used to think that Doordarshan or AIR might go that way, but COVID proved me totally wrong. Because during COVID, the amount of, because this is, you cannot treat news or information or infotainment as a product like a lot of people do. A trust is very important, as I said. So anything that comes from Doordarshan in the times of crisis, it comes with people trust it. So that trust, I think, will see Prasar Bharati, will see Doordarshan and AIR for a long time, and I don't think it will sort of zoom out from our
absolutely. And I think that raises expectations, and it imposes immense responsibility on both
yeah.
Doordarshan and All India Radio to get it right all the time. There's one other important aspect why public broadcasting is important. There is a Supreme Court verdict of 1995 or so, which has clearly said that no government entity can be in the business of broadcasting. The government cannot do broadcasting. Hence, you need to have an autonomous public broadcaster, which is independent or separate from the government. And that is when the act, though it was passed in 91, it finally came into effect only in 1997, where Prasar Bharati was created, and the government departments of Doordarshan and All India Radio were moved under the ambit of Prasar Bharati. So if any government entity wants to do anything in public interest, be it education, be it health, be it agriculture, because agriculture is perhaps the biggest public content that gets done across the networks of All India Radio and Doordarshan. We also have a dedicated channel for that, DD Kisan, for example, right? So to do all of this, it has to be done through the ambit of the public broadcaster, and hence there is a sort of statutory, constitutional, sanctity to why this will continue, and hence it will not. You can't look at it like any other public sector.
Yeah. But as I was reading and some of your writings, and I think you talked about, and I will move to private news in a bit, but I just wanted to talk about, because a lot of people don't understand this. They think that Prasar Bharati is fully funded by the government. And I think you had written somewhere, and you had this thing that, yes, employees get their salaries from the government in the sense that they are employees. It's a curious thing. It's not like
it's very absolutely
arrangement. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the funding.
Very important question, because it will answer the question of why is there no BBC from India.
Yeah.
This will answer that question. So when Prasar Bharati was created in 1997, there was an anomaly in that the employees of Doordarshan and All India Radio, who were government employees, they continued to remain as government employees, though they were now working for Prasar Bharati. So you have this bizarre situation where you have more than 20,000 employees, none of who are your employees, they're all government employees. So their salaries continue to be paid by the government, and that is through a grant. But as far as operations are concerned, Prasar Bharati has to earn its own revenues to run its operations.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is primarily through commercial advertising. You have this very bizarre contradiction where you have to provide public service news. You have to deliver it in hundreds of languages and dialects in areas where there is no commercial potential. You have to shoulder all this public responsibility.
Yeah.
But to run the operations, the funding has to only come from your commercial advertising. Yeah. So it's a contradiction. It creates a tension. It creates a stress point for the public broadcaster. Now, the big difference between, let's say, Doordarshan and All India Radio and the BBCs of the world is that in the UK, you have what is called a license fee, where anybody who has a television set has to pay a license fee.
Yeah.
And that license fee is an assured source of revenue for the BBC. So every year, the BBC doesn't have to worry about, how am I going to run my operation, because the license fees are a assured source of, until now. Now, of course, there is some debate that's going on. Now, if you look at rupee terms, the BBC's source of revenue from license fees alone will run into more than 30,000 crores.
Wow.
Now, look at the number of channels BBC runs. It is barely 10 channels.
Yeah.
So, to run a network of 10 to 15 channels and radio stations, your per channel input is running into thousands of crores. Look at Prasar Bharati and All India Radio and Doordarshan. You get about 1,500 crores of commercial revenue, and you have to run 30 channels, 400 radio stations. It's just, so that tells you why, where the gap is. The gap is that we do a whole lot more with a lot less because
Yeah.
we have all these responsibilities, and you have to keep the show going, right? And
Yeah.
and that is the difference, that the BBC is able to invest a whole lot more on a handful of channels and services.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, I'm glad you said this because a lot of people think that it's a common perception that Doordarshan and AIR are funded by the government. It isn't. Thank you for correcting that. Let's move to private news a bit. There is no doubt that news has become views and views have become news, and mostly what we see at 9 p.m. is not that traditional news broadcast anymore that we grew up with, where there was no news readers who just read the news. They were not even journalists, I think, many of them. They just used to read the news, and there was no analysis. Analysis happened later, and you knew that this was the analysis of the news. Now most ordinary people cannot tell the difference, and this happens in newspapers also. I see reporting even in the New York Times, that prides itself on this thing, but the line between opinion and reporting has blurred so much, even in New York Times and Washington Post and all our newspapers, Times of India and everywhere else. This could also be a disruption because of the technology, because news does not need to be broken anymore. As we already said, people already know, no amount of, thanks to Twitter and thanks to WhatsApp and everything, news gets broken even before any news reporter can get to it. Now they are also reporting news from Twitter because the characters in the news are breaking the news themselves. So what does news media do? They have to focus on analysis. What else can they do? So do you first of all think there is a crisis in news media, or do you think this is just another disruption? This is what people must have thought when printing press came, and then when radio came, and then when TV came, and now because we have this smartphone revolution, internet revolution, and then people think it's a crisis, and it really isn't crisis. It's just another.
There is a crisis, but I think it's of three different kinds of crises that we're talking about, right? Because you have the traditional news in the print.
Yeah.
Then, of course, you have the electronic media, and then you have digital media. The crisis is different in all these three.
Yeah.
In the case of print, there, of course, their challenge is that digitalization has taken away a lot of the leadership. So their struggle is largely around how to survive. Because people are, fewer and fewer people are going to buy newspapers, and everyone is on the web or apps. So that is their crisis. But I still think quality reporting, quality journalism still continues to happen in newspapers without a doubt. So if you want any serious information on any subject, of course, newspapers have biases without a doubt. But if you scan a cross section of newspapers, you will get fairly good idea of what is going on. However, there may be differences in terms of the English media versus in print versus the regional media, where regional media may perhaps be more locally focused, more in depth on regional and local issues. However, they may also not get the same degree of critical scrutiny that the national media gets. So that is one challenge they have. But otherwise, print is largely about how to survive. Then digital, you have a different challenge. In digital, it's largely the glut of news. There are so many portals, so many apps. There's very little differentiation. So everyone is now resorting to clickbait journalism, right? The sensational headline, that exaggerating, and then of course fake news, all of that. So digital has a different problem, which is about the supply is too large. Everyone wants a share of the pie, so people are doing crazy things. In the case of electronic media, just television media, it is a very bizarre what has happened, and then there is a serious problem with electronic media. In the rat race to prove that they are the biggest or they are number one, the news industry, especially the television news channels, have started cannibalizing each other.
Yeah.
And I think that has led to this bizarre culture where prime time shows are more about slugfest than any serious conversation.
Mm.
And it has also led to a division within the industry. There are two camps of news organizations, and they've gone to the throats of each other. They've complained against each other. They've fought in courts. They made a mess of the whole audience measurement system in the process. I think it's very, very unfortunate what has happened within the electronic news media sector. I think it is time that serious people, mature people come together and bury this division and realize that you need to compete fairly because unless there is fair competition, I don't think this industry can be risky.
But can TV news, I understand print will always be there because people who want to go beyond headlines and people who want to read long form, there will always be audience for long form. So people may not read newspapers anymore for breaking news, but they will for long form things, newspapers will exist. But television news, can it work in, see what we are doing right now, Shashi, we are in, there's you, there's me, and I have my technical team. We are in we're in two different continents and three different regions completely. 20 years ago, this would have taken thousands of rupees to do. And we are doing it not even in fraction of that amount now. And we have wonderful, I think I have wonderful lighting, you have wonderful lighting. We are doing a great thing with the business. Cameras have improved, and this is what television news is always doing. So do you think television can withstand this? Do you think television news can even exist?
It is getting disrupted. It is getting disrupted every moment, like you pointed out. And the fact that there are so many more compelling conversations happening digitally using audio video setups like this, very low cost, very easy to use. Television is clearly struggling. The larger problem for television news in India is also a problem of supply. There are too many channels, and they exist for other reasons, political reasons, and business reasons, not really for the fact that there's that much demand for television news. So there will be a very logical shakeout that will happen. Some of these channels will have to fold because there just isn't that much of an audience for all the television news channels. But will television go away? No, I don't think so, because there is the element of live coverages, and for live coverages, the television is perhaps the right medium, broadcast medium, because you'll have a large number of people tuning into an event.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the same with digital and internet, because you would want that quality of reception, and with broadcast, I can get uninterrupted HD quality, which you will not get on the internet, right? So when it comes to live events, big events, I think television will continue to be important. What perhaps will lose out is this what's going on between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. and 10 p.m. where there is so much of noise on the screen. I think that will slowly start. People will start tuning out. I don't think that is a sustainable model.
Yeah. So let's move to the content now. There is no denying that media, as you referred to it a little bit, that they are in camps now. So there is polarized media, totally polarized media. Mostly you can guess the position a news channel will take, or a news anchor will take. You sort of know that this is mostly 9 out of 10 times you are able to guess the position that they will take, which would be an anathema to a journalist of yore, that if your audience is able to guess the position you're going to take of anything, that would be an anathema to good old journalists in the past. But we've moved from that point. Now the journalists are saying that, listen, I am not hiding my biases. I am telling you my bias right away. I am telling you because the world cannot exist without biases. No journalism has ever existed without bias. Just because you think good old times were not were straight and objective, you are wrong. Even then, newspapers belonged to the richest guy in the area, because that is what they used to do. They used to buy newspapers, and then they were always loyal to the people who were buying them, or to their advertisers even then. So news has never been objective. So why are we doing this whole drama about objectivity? Why do we need objectivity? Let people think what is right for them, and let me wear my bias on my sleeve. At least I'm being honest that way. And then there is this old school of journalism who will say that no, this is not our job. Our job is to show you both sides, and then let the audience decide. What is your position on this? What news should be?
Yeah, if you recall, you talked about reading my writings for a long time. One of the things that I used to write in the blog for a long time was that journalists need to reveal their bias. They need to be transparent about where they stand or where they're coming from. So in a way, that is good that especially the television space, the anchors have become more open about where they stand, unlike in the past, where they would seem to be neutral when in fact they were batting for one particular political side or ideology. On the other hand, I don't think having an opinion or having a bias means you get into this shouting, screaming sort of tamasha that happens on screen, where there is no serious interrogation. I think you can do both. It doesn't have to be this or that. You can have a position, you can have a viewpoint, but you can interrogate the issue in a manner where not only are you making your point clear or where you're coming from, but you're also getting to the other side. Look at all aspects of it, bring out those aspects of it, and perhaps at the end have the last word that while this may be true or that may be right, I still feel this is how things should be, and so on. So it really depends on the individual and how they're able to do that. Unfortunately, I think in the rat race for TRPs, what has happened is that you are competing with the Saas Bahu serials, you're competing with cricket, right? And so hence the adrenaline level in the TV newsrooms is so high that you have this nonsense that goes on every night. So I think it will take someone to break from the pack and do some serious content. And I'm glad that when we saw that in Vion with Palki Sharma doing Gravitas, now she's moved to digital first post and on Network 18. I think that's a good break because it's a serious way of looking at issues and so on. I hope other anchors also take to that, and we see a more meaningful treatment of issues where have a bias by all means, put it out there upfront, and then interrogate the issue. Why not?
Yeah. I've already started getting a lot of questions from the show. So I would request our audience that if you have questions, start sending them in the last 10 minutes. I will ask our guest, Shashi, today to answer audience questions. So keep sending your questions. I'm receiving all of them right now. Shashi, you did talk about the crisis that's there, and it's good to wear your biases, but at the same time you should be able to talk about the other side also. I understand all that, and you did say that a digital medium is giving them a run for their money, but it's not as if everything is hunky-dory in the digital world. And I'll give you a little example. I consider myself a success only because digital world opened up, and you know it. I mean, there used to be gatekeepers, as you will remember. We were hard pressed at that time because if you were taking a center-right position, as I was taking, I continued to take on most things. There were no takers for us. I'm talking about 2007, 8, 9, there were no takers for us really, because the big media was an old boys club. They did not really allow any other kind of opinion. So there were gatekeepers everywhere in the news media. So there was no hope for people who were coming from a different point of view. Then the internet opened the space for us. We started doing those early blogs, and then that's how we tried to reach the audience. And then, of course, social media, when it came, then it totally changed the whole game. And I remember in 2000, I think it was 11 or 12, if I remember correctly, I wrote a piece called News in the Time of Social Media. And that was the first time a news media, it was a salacious, kind of news that had broken on internet. And it was about, I will tell my audience, a lot of them may not remember. It was about an incident that had happened with Member Parliament in Congress, Abhishek Manu Singhvi. And something, a scandalous news had emerged, and it had only come on, it was the first time it had come on, it was broken, so to speak, on social media. And it was spoken for 2 or 3 days only on social media, and then television news picked it up. So that was the first instance, one of the first instances. Now it happens routinely that television is taking news from Twitter or social media, but that was the first instance. And I remember writing this news in the time of social media, and I was trying to foresee what is going to happen in next 10 years, and I had predicted this is going to happen. And I said that a lot of people say that digital media has democratized the medium, which is good. Everyone can break news now, but at the same time they don't have the quote unquote qualification to determine what is news. And at that time I had said, leave it to people, they will know what is news, and they will sort of, if anything comes up, let everything come into the space, in the marketplace, and leave it to people. I think I have to change my position now a little bit, because I feel that digital media has also polarized the opinion so much that today you cannot decide if Pathan is a hit or a flop. Depending on who you are following, a movie is either a big flop or a movie is either a big hit. So these are tangible things. Even on those things, we are not agreeing anything. So do you think that this polarized media, digital media, has, instead of sort of bringing us together, it has, or agreeing on a few issues, it has polarized opinions so much that now we can agree on nothing?
No, I don't entirely agree with that. I think, see, what digitization has done is it has leveled the playing field. Right? It has democratized news media in that sense, because every one of us is a creator of news. Now, once you do that, you are talking of sampling from 10, 15, 20, 100 journalists to now millions of people, everyone with their own opinion. So that's bound to happen. It's bound to happen because now we are just looking at a much larger sample of views and opinions and perspectives. So it's natural that if someone wants to be heard, someone wants to stand out, they will get sharper, they will get shriller, they'll say things which are. But on the balance, I think if someone is a discerning audience who does their homework, looks at multiple sources, will definitely get the right picture. But of course, if you're looking to reinforce your biases, then of course what you're saying is true. Now it is possible that there is a vocal minority which is largely looking to reinforce their biases, and because that minority is so vocal, we tend to anecdotally observe them, spot them more often, and hence this perception that it's more polarized or we don't agree on anything. But I'm sure there's a fairly larger majority who are not as vocal on social media, though they're observing, they're consuming content, but they're not voicing their opinion. I think they do, have a sense of balance and a sense of discernment. However, there is a problem, which is a fake news, and that problem has gotten worse with tools like WhatsApp, where anything can go viral and it can get forwarded so many times that people unthinkingly forward things without checking the source, without checking its authenticity. And that's a genuine problem. And I think that needs a solution. We need to figure out how to solve that.
Yeah. So, fake news now, at least we now recognize fake news, but it's not as if fake news. I mean, I see problems with digital media also, but I think now fake news existed before also. And at least now, in real time, you can get corrected. But I'll tell you the incident of fake news even before, and then you would never get corrected when there was no digital media. Because if you remember 9/11, of course, there were no, social media at that time. I think there was a Princeton research poll of Americans which showed that 44% of respondents believed most or some of 9/11 hijackers were Iraqis. Of course, no, none of the hijackers were Iraqis, as we know. Or a New York Times CBS News poll revealed that 45% of respondents believed Saddam Hussein was directly involved in the 9/11 attacks. This is fake news before thing, and these perceptions never got cleared, at least in the times of, and this is why I have huge problems with digital media. But at least, if entity A is giving fake news, entity B is also there in the same field to say, no, this is fake news. Previous to that, it never got, because there were gatekeepers, so you never had broadcasting access. So Americans actually believed Saddam Hussein did 9/11, or all hijackers were Iraqis, but none of them were Iraqis. So there is an improvement in there, but so I don't really know if fake news has increased, or have we become more we can understand, or we can detect fake news now?
Both. I think both are true. One is, of course, there's a lot more detection happening because we're checking more often. Earlier, the perception was if it was in print, it was true, right? And hence we would unthinkingly consume whatever was printed as gospel truth. Now that's not the case. So clearly there is a lot more surveillance, a lot more monitoring, and a lot more responses that you're talking about. So we're able to correct and check. Having said that, however, the volume was also gone up, and we saw this during COVID, especially since I was in the government at that time. That the sheer volume of fake news around COVID-19 was so much that the government had to set up a fact check unit dedicated just to, because on a daily basis they were busting around thousands of fake forwards and fake items that were getting shared on social media and published. So the volume has gone up because there is more access. Anybody can be a news generator, and WhatsApp forward can go viral within no time. And so it's a problem of both. Some of it can be solved algorithmically, but what you are referring to, the false narratives, those are more subtle, those are more difficult, and there is no algorithmic check against them, and that requires a very consistent sort of monitoring and portals that are dedicated to calling these things up.
Yeah. Absolutely. Before I go to audience questions, we're almost on the last 15 minutes of our show now. So keep sending us questions. I'm getting them. I want to talk a bit about ownership of media. I don't have data for Indian newspapers and Indian media organizations, but I am suspecting it is pretty much the same. That in the United States, I had noticed that of the nation's 1,500 odd newspapers, nearly 1,200 or 80% are owned by the big chains, which of course concentrate on reaping large profits, and they're not given much to public self-examination on ethics and quality issues. It is not apparent to a lot of people when they read, but 22 companies control 70% of United States newspaper circulation, and 10 companies own the broadcast stations that reach 85% of the United States. I don't have the data for India, but I'm assuming it must be in the same framework, or it is getting there. So first of all, is there a problem with that? And B, do you see any space for advertisement less or just subscription based broadcasting where people are paying for the news?
Okay. So both are true. Both are true because again, India is so big, right? It's so diverse that both scenarios do exist. There is an ownership problem in certain respects, and there is no ownership problem in certain other respects. So let me explain both these statements. Take the case of Hindi and English news. If you're someone who is tracking the TRPs and the audience measurement that is being put out there for the news segment, it ran into problems and the ratings were suspended. I chaired a committee which made certain recommendations on how the ratings should be reformed. Some of those recommendations have been implemented, not all of them. And one of them was to smoothen out the ratings reported on a 4-week rolling average basis and so on. Despite that, there is still discontentment within the news, especially the Hindi and English news channel. And one of the reasons for that is what is this phenomenon called landing page. So a landing page is basically the channel that opens up when you switch on your set-top box.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is happening is in the race to compete and claim that you are the number one channel, the channels which are owned by big business houses, which have deep pockets, they are buying up landing pages in several cable markets. So you have this bizarre anomaly where a network 18 can claim greater reach than even a Hindi entertainment channel like Star Plus, right? Which is absurd, right? Because nobody's dying to watch network 18, people are dying to watch Anupama on Star Plus. So there's a big difference there. So now this is happening because you have these big business houses which have lapped up large parts of the news segment. And they have deep pockets, so they don't mind losing money on these channels. They don't mind making a loss, as long as they can put out front page ads for newspapers. Clearly, they are the biggest, and that's what is happening with Hindi and English news on the bigger channel side. However, on the smaller channel side, it is very, very democratic. Every political party has a channel. Every political leader of any repute has a channel of his own in whatever language or region that he or she hails from, right? So in that sense, it is both are true, but it is also odd, and I think this is something that some people have started to look at, is how certain channels which have barely any reach or barely any viewership are also recipients of a lot of advertising. So it's also bizarre that some of these channels are being used as fronts for laundering money and so on. So there is a problem because for example, we have 900 channels in India, which I don't think even the US has that many channels.
No.
Right? So there is so it is both are true. So there is an ownership problem in one sense, but it's also democratic in another sense. I expect that this is not sustainable. You can't keep buying landing pages and claiming that you're number one forever. And so at some point there will be a shakeup. Some of the channels will have to close down. There will be consolidation. We've already seen that on the entertainment side. Now we are left with only 3 big groups. You have the Disney group, you have Sony and Zee, which have merged, and then you have the Viacom 18. So pretty much entertainment and sports is largely concentrated within these 3 big groups. And then, of course, on the regional front, you have, Sun, for example, in South India, Enadu, in AP, Telangana, and so on. But these are small, much smaller entities. So I think a similar thing may happen on the news side. But also the interesting thing is there are many upstarts, right? You have Arnab, who has, who has disrupted the whole news space with his startup. You have TV9, which is again, very professionally run, young entrepreneurial, and they're also they've disrupted during the Ukraine crisis, especially. They did very well on the viewership side. So there are these younger channels which are pitted against the legacy media houses. And, the legacy media houses are increasingly owned by large business. That's the problem.
Are you a firm believer of market forces? Do you believe that market forces will eventually regulate news? And there should be because there's a lot of heartache almost every day, if you see, because when fake news comes or fake narrative comes in, so there is a lot of I just read, and this was not about in the Indian newspaper, by the way, it was in Guardian, so I don't even it's I sort of understand this stuff coming from Guardian. For example, it was an op-ed piece by a Pakistani writer, Fatima Bhutto, and she said that thousands of citizenships of Muslims have been taken away in India. And she said it as it was, like it was a statement of fact. And she said millions of people are getting, are being persecuted in Kashmir after Article 370. And she said factually incorrect things like Article 370 was the only bridge between Kashmir and India. So when Article 370 went, there is no, India does not have any, all that has been, these things are factually incorrect. But this was a UK newspaper, so I don't have much faith in that. But even in Indian newspapers and on a daily basis, we do see a lot of fake narratives. For example, CAA and all these issues. Thousands are getting persecuted, millions are getting routed, and all those things. And there's a lot of saying that why does government not do anything? Why does government not come out with it? And government also has its own. Government cannot be seen regulating news because then it's a democracy. We cannot do that. Where do you stand on this? Do you think market forces will regulate this?
No. Market by themselves will not do it. There has to be a regulatory framework. What the government has done, which I largely agree with, is a tiered model where the first tier is self-regulation. So the news organizations have to form a self-regulatory body, and that regulatory body is the first stop of complaints for these kinds of things that happen. So that's on the TV side. On the TV side, the self-regulating mechanism is now several years old and it's reasonably mature. And it has acted whenever there have been instances where someone has gone extremely beyond what is acceptable. Now the same framework is being applied for digital. We have to yet see how that plays out because it has been challenged in the courts. Some of the digital news portals have gone to the court and objected to that. But my guess is ultimately there has to be a level playing field. You can't have one set of rules for TV and another set of rules for digital, and ultimately this will have to be harmonized. So the self-regulating model will eventually apply to the digital portals as well. But then digital, the challenge is different, right? The numbers are so large.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how effective the self-regulating model on the digital side.
Yeah.
On the print side, you have the Press Council Act and the Press Council model, which is not a very effective model, though it is several decades old, and that needs to be redone. So my understanding is there is some exercise going on in trying to harmonize this entire space, have one, sort of overarching framework for media regulation, which is span print, digital, and electronic. So we'll wait and see how that plays out. But market by itself will not correct, and because the social costs are so high, especially in a country like India, where as a democracy which has got such a wide disparity, we are more vulnerable compared to the US or the UK or anybody else. And anyone like China, and just because we have anyone and anybody to tamper with the integrity of our elections, the integrity of our institutions, and so on.
Absolutely. And I have very bad experience of knowing that media actually covers itself. Media does not cover itself. They don't do any any self-reflection. I remember when a quote I had read somewhere that when it comes to look at itself, society's watchdog is a lamb. So they don't look at themselves. So I also agree with you that market forces may not be the only thing. because this is not a bar of soap that is being sold. This is information, and it costs. I mean, this is important things. So we cannot allow a fake narrative or a visibly fake and tangibly fake thing to be circulated in the name of democracy or free speech. I am getting questions now from our, as I told you, Shashi, most of our audience is millennial Gen Z. So they have these questions. When we circulated your name, they were very excited. A few of them might be wanting to come into this space of news creation themselves. So they have they have many questions. We'll take as many as the time allows. One of these questions is, how can the coming generation of passionate journalists rescue the news media, given the choice between joining established broadcasters or print media and starting one's own digital news media platform for more independence? What is the advice that you give to passionate journalists who would like to come into the business?
That's a great question and a very tough one to answer. Right? What is the right way? One is, of course, the values. Right? What you do as a professional, how you build your career, will largely depend on the kinds of values you profess.
Yeah.
And those values will stand with you irrespective of whether the times are good or bad. And they will shape, mold, how you're perceived all through your career. So my advice would be that hold steadfast to those values, and truth ultimately matters, and you have to be loyal to the truth as it is. Right? Now, be on social media, be savvy on social media, because as pointed out earlier, everyone is a news creator these days. And personally, you have, especially if you want to be a television anchor or TV reporter, or you want to have a strong opinion in the digital space, then it's important for you to be effective on social media. And I noticed that a lot of be active on Facebook as a digital brand on Twitter, and the social media that matters in the news space. So I think that is an important skill set. Second is read, get it, never stop reading, never stop learning. That's very important. In fact, I tell that to even the interns who used to join that learning should never stop.
Yeah.
And you will never know everything. You will never, get the complete picture. So your role as a journalist is to interrogate the truth, irrespective of your biases, irrespective of your prejudices.
Yeah.
And then the only way that will happen is you will learn. And I do that all the time. And I'm reading every day hundreds of things. And so learning, reading should never stop.
Absolutely. And I will only add, having been in this space for a long time, I will only add focus on writing, because reading is important, but also focus on writing. A lot of our young people are not, because we grew up in a time where as a sub editor we used to learn how to write, and we were forced by our editors to write a copy.
Well, now ChatGPT will do it for you.
Those things have gone away now. So try to write. Writing is very important, because you reading and then expressing yourself is as important. Try to write concisely. Try to write as interestingly as possible. So that's very important. Then there is another interesting question, Shashi, and I honestly don't have an answer for this. So we have a few popular digital news media channels which are outrightly against advertising, so to speak, and are paid subscription based. But they do have clear biases and political inclination. Does it mean that news media will always stay biased and polarized irrespective of funding?
That's a good question. So, see, ultimately, each portal or each entity has to have their own business model. Some may be, open and ad funded. Some may be closed and subscription based. I don't think it has anything to do with biases or polarization. I think it's quite independent of that. It's about how they survive. And digital is hard. Digital is not easy, right? Because you have these big behemoths like Google and Facebook who control a lot of how information gets shared, who gets to be viewed, who is recommended, and given that inherent uh, asymmetry of big platforms and many small outlets, a few big platforms and many small outlets. Making money in digital will always be challenging, and each
Yeah.
outlet has to figure out, how they're going to sustain themselves. And it's not easy because I haven't seen successful digital business models yet,
No, I
barring a few legacy media who have, because of their legacy brand, are able to do it. Otherwise, it's very very hard. It's not easy. So I wouldn't hold that against any port. As far as polarization is concerned, as I said, you need to stand out in a crowd, and to stand out in the crowd, you have to be wearing bright colors so you get spotted, right? And you have to have a loud voice, so it'll happen.
Absolutely. And one last question, and this is an important question. It's about local news. They say this is also a contradiction. Like everything in India, there is also a contradiction because we always feel that there is a journalist made this phrase popular, a tyranny of distance, and news is all Delhi based and it's all coming from Delhi. So this question is about local news. Will TV news ever cover local news? And there's a contradiction. At one point, we feel that we need to be covering international news more. We need to be sort of focused on, we don't need to be so insular. We also need to be talking about issues that happen in other countries if we want to sort of talk about it. But at the same time, India is such a huge country and we have our local issues also. We need to be talking about local, very hyper local issues also that concern people. Is there a balance?
Great question. I think whoever asked it, very, very thankful for having asked this question. Because I think this goes to the heart of what is wrong with this media in India, right? That there is hardly any local news channels.
Yeah.
And there are three reasons for this. One is how our television industry evolved, right? We started with terrestrial television, rooftop antennas, Doordarshan. And then, unlike in the US, UK, and other markets, where terrestrial should have opened up to digital, and we should have had multiple terrestrial channels, we just made the switch from terrestrial directly to satellite and cable. The moment you go to satellite and cable, because of the way the technology works, it's a national footprint. So everyone ended up being, either a nationwide channel or a statewide channel at best, right? And an associated problem with this is the way the advertising industry works in India. Because the television advertising model in India is a nationwide model with language-specific markets, Hindi speaking market or Telugu speaking market, and so on. So their granularity stops at that. It doesn't go beyond that. And hence, you don't have local advertising. And because you don't have local advertising, there is no incentive to do local, hyper-local chat. And so that's the problem with the way TV architecture is in India. However, on the digital side, I've seen that, for example, Aaj Tak has now city-specific YouTube channels. So that's an interesting experiment. I don't know how successful it is. We have to look at the data on that, and others will replicate it. But clearly, there is potential. There is scope for city-specific and town-specific content. Now, one way we can bring this back is with technology, a new technology. That's something I've been talking about for quite some time now, which is direct-to-mobile broadcasting, where you have the ability to broadcast directly to mobile phones. You have a variant of this already happening in the United States with ATSC 3.0. Now, the potential of this technology is that unlike the past where you needed the rooftop antenna, all you need is an embedded chip, similar to the FM radio chip in your smartphone. You can directly receive signals. So then you can get, live audio, video, data content without having to require a SIM card or a cellular data plan. So because it's broadcast over the air. So that is a potential disruptor, and there are pilots currently on in India. And if this goes forward, it is possible that we could soon see city-specific content and say specific channels being able to take advantage of the broadcast spectrum.
Absolutely. We have reached the end of the show. And when I was overlooking day-to-day newsroom in Mindmakers, I used to tell my colleagues that we are not in the business of breaking news, and we cannot be anymore. The only news that I'm interested in, the only way to know that is this news worth publishing, is that you should ask yourselves that, will I be interested in this news 48 hours from now? If the answer is yes, then it is news worth publishing. That used to be my month. I don't know how correct it is, but that used to drive me, and that still drives me. Even when I'm consuming news, because sometimes you do get overwhelmed with news. So then I ask myself, is this something that will? Sometimes it seems so big when it is breaking. It seems huge. So I step back and I always ask myself, will this be important 48 hours from now? That is very important. So keep that little thing in your mind. So whenever you are looking at news and when it seems that the world is ending, ask yourself that, will this still be as important 48 hours from now? And if it will be, then probably you should spend some time on it. But if it isn't, then don't give much issue.
I think it's a great point that you made.
Yeah.
That I always tell that, always look for what is the knowledge value, what is the information
Yeah.
value. Then the shelf life is much longer.
Yeah.
But I've been pleasantly surprised with some of the newsletters that I've subscribed to on Substack. Very good content.
Very good
content that you can spend 20, 30 minutes reading. And there's so much of information, so much of knowledge value there that you will, archive it, keep it for future reference.
Yeah.
I think that's where the stickiness will come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also don't think, unlike what most people think, I do not think long form has gone out of business. I do not think long form has gone out of business. I think long form is very much there, and it will make a huge comeback. And that's what I'm betting my money on, that it is going to come. It's going to make a huge comeback, because at some point when people are going to be tired of 140 characters and then this thing, that is when they will look for long form. So people who write long form, don't be disheartened. It is coming back, and that's my prediction. And before I let you go, Shashi, you have been a disruptor in your personal life. You've been talking about disruptions in media, but you've been quite a disruptor in your personal life as well, from IT to public broadcaster to now UGC. What do we expect from you in next 5 years?
That's a great question.
This model.
Yeah, I've had several disruptions, as you rightly pointed out. Started off as a chemical engineer, then IT, then digital media, political campaign, then public office. So it's been a significant series of shifts. I mean, it's hard to tell what the future holds, but I think it will be something at the intersection of technology and public policy and whatever is national interest. Because that is what motivated me to come back to India and go back to India.
So to all these people who are watching right now, don't be afraid to take risks. Don't be afraid to think that, I have done something in one field for 10 years and now I can move. You can change industries. You can change your role. You can relearn. You can forget what you learned in the past. All this is done. And news, as far as I am concerned, I think news will continue to be polarized, will continue to be biased, but you as a viewer will have more and more control over what you want to consume. And that is the best scenario, I guess, that we can be, versus you being given controlled news. The way forward probably is that you as a viewer should be able to control what you want to consume. Shashi, thank you so much for being on Epicenter. I really appreciate it. And based on the feedback that I am getting, I have not been able to take all questions. We might have to call you again based on just the questions that I am getting. But thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. To my viewers, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been, I thought it would be a good, interesting topic for you to understand we're all consumers of news, but you also should understand how news works, because this is also an industry of, how it's regulated and who pays for news and how you should consume news. So keep reading, be well. Subscribe to Epilogue News Network on YouTube, because that is the only way you can follow us. You will know when new episodes are coming up, new guests, who are subject experts in their own fields, when they'll be coming up, and all the news information. So follow us, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow Epilogue News Network on various social media handles. And you can follow me personally on Twitter and ask me questions. If there are any more topics that you would like to discuss, or if there are any more issues or any guests that you would like us to interview, please let me know. Thank you so much. Be well. I'll be back next week. This is Sunanda Vashisht signing off.